From orbit, the planet had appeared like an amber pearl, one band of desert girdling the equator, subtropical belts of indigo scrub, polar caps of carbon ice, small seas reflecting the local star with a pewter sheen. Uninhabited, the survey briefs had promised. Geologically lively, atmospherically thin, biosignatures ambiguous, fine words, safe words. Then a sheer front clipped vigilant dawn on descent. The port thruster coughed to a halt, and the amber pearl snapped onto its side like a beast throwing a rider. 3 weeks later by Elias's best count using the ship's only surviving chronometer. He had stopped trusting the light here. It overexposed distance. Heat halos fidgeted on the horizon like cities made of glass. The famous twin suns never rose quite fully apart. The larger cast a crimson-banded glare, and the smaller ghosted just above, a pilot fish of fire. Shadows doubled and did not agree. His days settled into instruction and ritual. He salvaged what he could, a cracked multi-tool, a coil of smart cable, 2 emergency sheeting rolls, 1 flare which he told himself he would not burn unless he had to, a folded solar blanket that smelled like scorched tin, 3 vials of stable antibiotics, a pressure syringe, and a single canteen. There was also the mission recorder, its outer casing pitted but operable. He used it for a steadying habit, to talk. Log Mercer 031, he said, lips split, voice husked by sand. Local hour approximated at noon. Solar incoming still stable. D-band radiation spikes after second sun clears meridian. Advice to self, stop sunbathing on reflective hull. Food at 40%. Water at, he paused. The canteen, rag wrapped to minimize heat transfer, swished to lightly. Water at 14%. Reminder, the desert does not care what you planned. He hunted, if the word applied. Tiny burrowing hexapods came out at dawn to drink from frost halos circling heat-bled rock. He flicked them into a pan and toasted them to nutty ash. He set the ship's cracked wing upwind as a condensation surface, and planted the emergency sheeting at night to collect whatever the thin air would yield. It yielded little, a spoonful here, a spoonful there. In the afternoon he would search for the rumored scrublands beyond the dunes always, 40 minutes farther than his legs could risk, always pulling back with the copper taste of failure on his tongue, on the 22nd sunrise, with the small sun peeking clear and the big one already boiling. Elias climbed to the dune crown to let the twin shadow lines tell him direction. He had named them. Big Red's shadow was the knife, Little Blue's was the thread. Walk with the knife to your back and the thread across your left shoulder, he had discovered, and you more or less traced a shallow arc back toward the ship no matter how the light lied. He turned to mark the way and saw the gullies in the lee of the next dune, darker than they should be, scuffed as if something had dragged itself through the powdery grit. He forgot the recorder. He forgot his careful walking. Sand hissed from under his boots as he slid and stumbled toward the gully floor. The marks were distinct up close, paired grooves like a sled track, crossed now and then by a pattern of pox 5, spaced like the petals of a star. Blood dotted the sand beside them in beads that had dried to a dull mirror. It was not the brown of his own species. It was black at the edges, silvered in the center as if it contained metal dust. Elias's scalp prickled. Log Mercer 031 addendum. He breathed, have to anchor himself in the habit. Signs of fauna, or someone else's survey machine having a worse week than mine. He followed the grooves round a bend of dune. Heat shimmer manicured the air into wavering strips. A few steps more, and the gully opened on a shallow depression where wind had scoured the sand down to bedrock. There, crumpled in the nest of stone, lay a figure. It was not simply a man with different skin. It was as if a blueprint for a person had been redrawn, with alternate compromises. Limbs, 4, humanoid at a glance, but the forearms were subtly longer, and the fingers 5 had an extra joint, giving them an architectural grace even in collapse. The skin was a pale burnished silver along the arms and face, but it wasn't paint. It was biosurface, a living metal sheen that rippled faintly like fish scales where breath moved. The head was hairless and more elegant than any human face, features refined to spare angles. Jaw narrow, brow high, eyes closed tight against the light. Clothing, if that's what it was, clung as a second skin in bands of matte graphite and threads of iridescence, torn across the torso. The wounds beneath were ugly, slashes gouged from ribs to hip, cauterized in places by heat or chemistry, oozing that mirror-shot blood. Elias's mouth went dry in a new way. A century of academy training shouted warnings, quarantine protocols, first contact laws. The 1,000 ways good intentions could unravel into disaster. He had been a field linguist before he'd learned to pilot. He knew what the manuals said about the ethics of interference and the arrogance that came disguised as help. But he also saw an organism bleeding out under 2 suns while the wind fretted grit into the cuts. His world moved onto rails. He anchored his boots in the bedrock to keep from sliding, shrugged off his ragged jacket, and put it beneath the alien's head. He touched the throat lightly. The skin there was cool compared to the air. A pulse trembled fast to fast like a songbird's. He heard, or imagined, a sound from the alien's mouth, a clipped click, or a syllable caught and crushed by pain. "It's all right," Elias said. The words were nearly useless as communication, but they steadied his hands. "You're not alone." He uncapped the canteen. He hesitated with the old rules shouting in his head-known biochemistry. Cross-species contamination. You could be poisoning it, but he watched a thread of the precious water, only a moth's wing width, pour onto the alien's lower lip. The lip, that smooth pale surface, shivered. The mouth parted. A tongue, dark, thin, quick, flicked and caught the water, and then the throat worked. The body's tension eased by 1 notch. Elias dribbled 5 more drops, then stopped and capped the canteen. He tipped his head back and laughed once, a raw sound that tasted like relief and terror. "Okay," he said, pulling the multi-tool from his belt, popping out the cleanest blade. He cut the emergency sheeting into strips, then held 1 strip up to the mirror heat and watched microbes die in the ultraviolet glare. He had no idea if that mattered to this being, but it mattered to him to act as if it did. He cleaned around the cuts with another few drops of water and the antiseptic foam. From his last cartridge, the foam blossomed, hissed. The alien jerked and made that clipped sound again. "Yeah, bite me later," Elias murmured. "This will keep your insides on the inside." It took time, and a stubborn calm he had learned from long days in tiny cockpits with alarms wailing. He pressed the sheeting strips over the worst wounds and tightened them with Smartable until the oozing slowed. The body's shivers evened. He checked for other injuries. The left calf showed bruising under the metallic sheen, as if something had seized it with a machine's grip. The right wrist, fine bones there, almost bird-like, was swollen, but not broken. He worked down to logistics. Day heat would not let up. If he left the alien here, even bandaged, the suns would cook it, and the dessert would erase all evidence by evening. He eyed the distance back to the shipwreck, to dune chains, a basin like a bowl, a long climb. He would have to drag. He set the canteen aside. He slid his arms under the alien's shoulders and knees and tried to lift, and found the weight weirdly distributed, not heavy, but awkward. The kind of mass that fought his balance. The skin under his forearms was textured like the smooth side of a leaf. The alien's eyelids fluttered. 1 eye cracked open. Elias had expected a glitter bead or a compound lens. Instead, the eye was deep and laminar, blue like an alpine lake, its surface reflective enough to show his own ruin of a face. For a moment the alien looked directly up at him, and Elias had the uneasy, humbling sensation that he was being measured not by species traits or threat profiles, but by something more immediate and simple, whether he would follow through. "Hi," Elias said. The eye closed. The body slackened in his arms in an acquiescence that was not trust yet, but was not resistance. He made a travois using the ship's broken wing strut and the second roll of emergency sheeting. He lashed the alien to it across the shoulders and hips with the Smartable, leaving the wounds free to drain, and rigged the solar blanket into a crude shade that he could carry overhead like a sail. Then he leaned into the drag. Sen accepted the strut with the softness of a throat, and the first meters demanded every trick his legs remembered about walking in grains. That behaved like liquid. He did not stop to count the minutes. When he stumbled, he made himself get up in the same movement. When he parched, he let 1 drop fall on his tongue to remind his body what came next. The suns climbed toward their choreography where one would bisect the other. In a shallow almond of brightness, Twice he thought he heard something clicking like hail on stone. Distant and multiple, and twice he saw nothing when he scanned the dune tops. At the edge of the basin, his thighs burning, he rested the travois and checked the alien again. The chest rose and fell in calmer rhythms now. As he watched, the skin around the wounds rippled with a subtle subdermal movement that reminded him of self-healing composites in the newer ships. The bandages darkened as the strange blood wicketed outward and dried to those black-silver flecks. He looked at his own hands and found them glittered too, as if he had dipped them in powdered metal. Log Mercer. He swallowed. Forget it. No breath for logs. He took the alien's wrist carefully, the way he'd been taught to show open intentions to nervous creatures, and felt the pulse again. It laid a beat against his fingers like a code. He wondered if anyone else had ever counted it who wasn't of its kind. The last climb back into the wind with the ship's broken hull in view put black along the edges of his vision. He made the final meters as if crawling through fog. When the travois bumped metal, he sat down hard and let the world ring. Shade worked miracles. He had propped the solar blanket between two ribs of the hull and stretched it down to ground, and the temperature under there fell by a hard-to-believe margin. He levered the alien onto the survival pallet he had turned into his bed, then released the lashings. The palace gel flexed and held the body in a half-reclined position. Elias rechecked the bandages, added adhesive patches to keep the edges from curling, and set the canteen where his dazed brain would not step on it. He became aware of his own smell, stale sweat threaded with metal, and the sour note of fear and of the steady hiss of a wind he had tuned out since the crash. The ship creaked like an old animal settling its bones. After a long time of just listening to not fall asleep, he forced himself up and activated the mission recorder. Log Mercer 032. He whispered. Immediate, first contact scenario. Individual, unknown classification, approximate mass. He glanced over. It was never wise to guess mass out loud. And known. Wounds treated with available sterilants. Fluid exchange minimal. A few drops of water. I recognized the violation of contact protocol. I also recognized that leaving someone to die under two suns to honor a rule no one will read, because no one is here to read it, would have been unacceptable. If Command reviews this, and somehow I've made it back to hear it, I'll accept censure. If Command doesn't, then maybe this recording is just me speaking to the wind. The recorder's indicator glowed faint green. For a foolish moment, Elias thought it looked like approval. The alien stirred then. A full-bodied motion that started at the ribs and moved outward in a wave. The eyes opened both now and focused on the low curve of the hull overhead, then on Elias. The mouth-shaped sound. What came out was not a word he could know. It was a stack of phonemes, clicks laid over a high liquid consonant. Like a brook running over beads of glass. Elias put a hand to his chest. Elias, he said slowly. He did not exaggerate his mouth movements the way some tourists did with foreign languages. He kept his voice steady and his vowels honest. Elias. The alien blinked once, twice. The pupils round they had pupils tightened against a moving shaft of light. The mouth formed his name not perfectly, but close. Elias. The sound reached inside him and unlocked something he had braced tight since the crash. He nodded stupidly. Yeah, the alien spoke again. 3 quick syllables that fell like a recognized cadence. Elias's training stumbled awake. He heard the repetition. The gesture that accompanied it, a small tap of the long fingers against the upper chest. Name. Maybe, he mimicked the tap, pointed gently toward the alien. You. The alien made the same 3 syllables. Elias tried to echo them and mangled the second half, tongue not willing to fall into that liquid consonant. The alien's eyes narrowed. Then, and it was ridiculous to ascribe emotion already, but then he swore he saw something like ripe patience there. The alien repeated slower. Elias matched closer. Okay, Elias said softly when they had a compromise. Okay, he had intended a plan for the rest of the day, more water condensing. A trip back to the gully to see if scavengers would follow the blood. A search for anything in the wreckage he had overlooked. Plans are what you make before the living thing in front of you needs a different plan. He tore a strip from his last clean shirt and used it as a makeshift sling. For the alien's swollen wrist, he shifted the solar blanket as the suns moved, keeping the pallet in a river of shade. He cut the ration bar into grains and tasted one himself before offering a single grain. On the back of his nail to the alien sniffed with delicate offense and declined. Elias grinned despite himself. Right? Cultural misunderstanding, one of probably 10,000. The heat coasted down like a sledge late in the afternoon. The red sun slid off its partner. The blue haloed it, and shadows braided as the day relented. Asternine's sky, incapable of leaving well enough alone, unveiled a second act. High, thin cloud stacks that ran like the ribs of a ship across the western horizon. He had seen them each evening and named them the literal, because they reminded him of tide lines. He was almost asleep, half curled at the palay's foot, when the alien spoke again. Not a name this time. For syllables, the last one held a fraction longer, followed by a click that echoed down the hull ribs. Elias lifted his head. The alien repeated the sequence and made a small, precise gesture with the good hand, thumb and first two fingers opened like a cup, then pressed to the lips and extended outward. He had not seen it earlier in the gully, but in memory it fit. There had been a movement like that just before silence. Drink, Elias guessed. He mimed the canteen, uncapped it, took a sip himself to show the intent, then tipped a few drops into the alien's mouth. The alien swallowed, blinked, then made a different gesture, a tiny flick of two fingers toward Elias, as if returning something. Gratitude, or a ritual acknowledgement. He could be wrong, but the possibility warmed him in a way not even shade could. He gave for more drops. He put the canteen aside with exaggerated care. The alien watched every movement, not suspicious, not yet trusting, simply cataloging. As he was cataloging them, dusk on Asternine was short. The big sun dove and the small followed shyly. Stars leapt from the canvas at once, brighter than in any sky he had grown up under. A band of dustier light, some local cloud cut a diagonal that his heart insisted was a river. He set the recorder to passive capture and leaned his head back against scorched alloy. He listened as the hull ticked. The wind combed the sheet between its teeth. The alien's breath threaded the chamber. He woke in true night to a sound that threaded through the others like a new instrument, joining old players, distant, delicate. A chain of clicks and trills that shifted position in the air as if spoken by more than one mouth, moving in a pattern. He went cold and then hot, all at once. He slid silently to the hull's opening and lifted the blanket's edge by a handspan. The dunes were ink outlines under starlight. The gully beyond was a mouth of darker ink. Nothing moved. The sound came again, softer now, not so much searching as asking. He thought of the tracks, the paired grooves, the bruised calf as if seized. He thought of how careful he had been to drag in a path that would blur upwind, to let the basin's gusts erase his trail. He closed the blanket and let the sound pass around the ship as the wind carried it away. Under the solar shade, the alien's eyes were open, reflecting starlight. Those eyes moved to him and held, question and warning nested together. Elias put his finger to his lips, a human gesture this time, and then, remembering the earlier motion, he made the little cup two-mouth sign, then turned his palm down, pushing gently toward the pallet. Stay, for a span of heartbeats that felt too long. The alien did not move. Then they mimed his motion, even more delicately, and let their head sink to the palay's curve. The clicking faded. Night settled its weight. Elias sat with his back to the hull, and the multi-tool open across his knee. He did not sleep again. And if the recorder captured him, whispering a promise into the dark to protect this one, to hold his nerve when the light lied again, then it was just one more thing. For the wind to hear first. Near dawn, the air thinned toward frost. Grains of sand radiated heat up like the breath of some sleeping giant. Elias reached to check the bandages by habit and found only the palay's indentation. For half a second his brain refused the data. Then all at once the emptiness laid out specifics. The loosened smart cable coiled neatly. The shirt strip sling set beside the pallet as if in thanks. The faintest pattern of 5-petal pocks leading toward the hull's edge and vanishing under the blanket's seam. He shoved himself forward and flung the blanket aside. Outside, dawn made a smudge of pale copper at the horizon. The sand held no track. The desert had done as deserts do. It had accepted the night's story and erased it with morning wind. Elias's chest compressed. He said nothing. He let the empty pallet sit in his vision like a lesson he could not yet read. He crouched, touched the place where the alien's head had rested, and felt the warmth still trapped in the gel. He did not know enough to call it a miracle or a mistake. He knew only that he had given water to a stranger, and that something in the world had changed, as certainly as a dune changes shape under a long breath. He capped the canteen, packed the recorder, and stepped out into the brightening. The day would lie again. That was its nature. He would answer it with the only truth he had. He would be where he said he would be. And when something came back to look, they would find him here. Behind him, under the shade, a shine like powdered starlight glittered faintly across the palais's edge, clinging to the fabric in a curve shaped like a hand. For 2 days after the stranger vanished, Elias Mercer lived with that silence like a weight pressing on his chest. The bedroll still carried the faint indentation of the alien's body. The sheeting he had cut into bandages fluttered in the wind, stiffened by dried silver blood. And every morning, he crawled out beneath the ragged hull of vigilant dawn and scanned the dunes, hoping for a glint of metallic skin or the delicate 5-petaled footprints. But the desert gave him nothing. He told himself it didn't matter. Survival did. There was still the business of coaxing condensation from the air, still the endless search for the scrublands that might provide food and shelter, still the dream of sending a distress signal strong enough to pierce Astrone's thin ionosphere. And yet, every night, as he lay beneath the twisted ribs of his wrecked ship, the silence whispered otherwise. Something had shifted. The emptiness was not emptiness anymore. It was waiting. On the morning of the third day, the waiting ENDEDI tremors in the sandit began as a low vibration beneath his boots. Elias was halfway up a dune, scouting for landmarks, when the ground hummed faintly, a heartbeat pulsing through the crust. He paused, frowning. Quakes were rare on Astronine. He had read that much in the mission files. But this was not the deep, distant shudder of tectonic activity. This was closer, rhythmic, approaching. He knelt and pressed his palm to the sand. The tremor strengthened. Then came the sound, soft at first, then swelling into a steady thum-thum-thum, like the synchronized stride of 100 heavy beasts. What the hell? He murmured. He scrambled to the crest of the dune and peered toward the horizon. At first, the rising heat shimmer distorted everything into wavering ghosts. But as the mirage resolved, Elias's breath caught in his throat. A procession was moving across the desert. Not a handful of creatures, but a column long, disciplined, and deliberate. At its forefront, shapes leapt and bounded with sinuous power. They were huge, 4-legged predators, each the size of a small shuttlecraft, their striped fur glistening like molten bronze, and upon their backs rode figures, dozens of them silver-skinned and luminous, eyes glinting like distant stars. Riders, Elias whispered. They're riding the damn tigers. He stumbled back down the dune, heart pounding, and sprinted toward the ship. By the time he reached the wreckage, the ground was vibrating so hard that dust sifted from the hull seams. He ducked inside the broken cockpit and retrieved his emergency beacon, finger hovering over the activation switch. But then he hesitated. Who would hear it? Who would come? He set the beacon aside and grabbed his multi-tool instead, not as a weapon because he doubted it would matter, but as something to hold on to. Then he waited, too. The procession column halted 100 meters from the crash site. The great tiger beasts prowled restlessly, their fangs as long as Elias's forearm, their striped coats rippling under the wind. One of them raised its massive head and roared a deep, thunderous sound that rolled across the desert like a living storm. Elias felt it in his bones. The riders dismounted in near-perfect unison. There were perhaps 40 of them, tall, graceful, their silver skin gleaming in the harsh sunlight. They wore armor that looked grown rather than forged, its surfaces flowing like liquid metal, and carried long staffs capped with stones that pulsed with blue light. At their center was a figure Elias recognized immediately. The alien he had saved. It looked stronger now, no longer half dead and crawling. Its wounds had healed to faint silver scars, and it stood tall, draped in flowing crimson cloth that snapped in the wind. When its eyes met his, there was a flash of recognition and something else, gratitude. It stepped forward, raising both hands in a gesture Elias interpreted as peace. Water bearer. It said, Its voice was still rough, still struggling with galactic standard, but the word was unmistakable. You gave life. Elias blinked. You can speak more now. The alien nodded once. I learned. Then it turned and gestured to the assembled riders. We came to repay. Elias repeated, wary. I didn't do it for repayment. You were dying. But before he could finish, the riders parted, creating a corridor through their ranks. From the rear of the column, 2 more of the great tiger beasts advanced, carrying a structure between them, an ornate canopy woven from silken fibers that shimmered in the light. Beneath it stood a figure draped in white and silver. She was smaller than the others, more delicately built, but her presence radiated authority. Her hair, if it was hair, floated around her head like strands of liquid mercury. A thin crown of carved crystal rested on her brow, and a pendant pulsed faintly against her chest. When she stepped forward, the entire tribe dropped to one knee. Even the tiger beasts bowed their heads. 3. The Britty Elia's heart hammered. Who is she? The alien he had saved turned to him, and its voice was almost reverent. Liratha, daughter of our chieftain, keeper of the ancestral memory, first of our blood. Liratha approached with measured grace, each step deliberate, eyes locked on Elias. When she stood before him, she extended her hands, palms up, and spoke in a language he didn't understand, liquid and melodic. Like water over stones, she speaks our vow, the alien explained. A bond older than memory. The one who gives life to one of us becomes one of us. And to seal that bond, the alien paused, as if searching for the right word. We offer union. Elias stared at him. Union. The alien inclined its head. Liratha is offered to you as bond bride. The words slammed into Elias like a physical blow. He stepped back, shaking his head. No, that's not necessary. I didn't save you for a reward. I didn't ask for this. The alien's expression remained calm but firm. This is not reward, it is law. To refuse the bond is to refuse the tribe. Liratha spoke again, and this time, though Elias couldn't understand the words, the tone was unmistakable, gentle, curious, almost amused. She studied him with eyes that seemed to see past the surface of his skin, as if searching for something deeper. Do you reject me? She asked, the phrase halting but understandable. Elias swallowed hard. I don't reject you. This is all happening too fast. She tilted her head. Fast? Yes. I don't know you. You don't know me. Back on Earth, we take time for things like this. The alien emissary raised a hand, and the murmurs of the gathered tribe fell silent. Time we can give. But understand, from this moment, you are water bearer. One of us. And our fate and yours are now bound. 4. The water bearer. The rest of the day passed in a surreal blur. The tribe set up a sprawling encampment around the crash site, constructing tents from iridescent fabric and building fire pits that glowed with blue flame. They brought food, strange fruits that glistened like molten glass, and slabs of roasted meat that tasted faintly of citrus and copper. They sang songs in their melodic tongue, songs that Elias did not understand, but felt deep in his chest. They treated him not as a prisoner, not even as a guest, but as something sacred. Children approached shyly to touch his hand. Warriors bowed their heads when he passed. Everywhere he went, whispers followed him. Water bearer, bond keeper, life giver. As the twin suns sank below the horizon and the sky bled into violet dusk, Liratha approached his campfire. She sat across from him, the flames painting silver light across her face. You do not trust this, she said softly. Elias poked at the fire with a piece of twisted hull metal. I don't know how to trust it. Yesterday I was stranded on a dead world. Today I am apparently engaged to an alien princess. Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile. You think too much, maybe, he sighed. I'm just trying to understand why. Why me? Because you chose compassion when you could have chosen nothing, Liratha said simply. And in our way, compassion is the highest law. It binds the living together. Silence stretched between them, comfortable this time. Elias stared into the fire and thought about Earth, about the endless wars fought over lines on a map, about how often fear outweighed empathy. And here, on a nameless desert world, one act of kindness had changed everything. When he looked up, Liratha was watching him with eyes full of stars. Maybe, he said quietly, This isn't such a bad thing after all. She reached across the fire and took his hand in hers. Her skin was cool, almost electric. Then let us learn, she whispered. Together, and somewhere beyond the firelight, the tiger beasts roared into the night, and the stars above Astronine shone brighter than they ever had before. Tents rose where there had been only dunes. Great striped beasts dozed in the sand, their flanks rising and falling like the slow tide. Voices carried through the air, melodic, rhythmic, sometimes punctuated by sharp clicks that Elias's ear was beginning to distinguish as emotion. The wreckage of vigilant dawn, once a lonely grave of shattered alloy, had become the heart of a new settlement, and at the center of it all was him. Water-bearer. The name followed him wherever he went. Children whispered it and tugged at his sleeves. Warriors spoke it with solemn nods. Even Liratha, whose presence seemed to silence entire crowds, addressed him with the title, as if Elias Mercer were too small for what he had done. Yet Elias felt anything but worthy. Each day brought new expectations, new ceremonies, and new questions he could not answer. And beneath it all lay the same nagging thought: I gave water to a dying being. That's all. Lessons in the dust. Liratha insisted that, if they were to be bound by their people's law, Elias must understand their ways. And so, his mornings became lessons: language, customs, rituals. They sat together beneath a canopy of woven light fiber, the air cool and fragrant with herbs that smelled faintly of mint and iron. She spoke slowly, deliberately, shaping words so he could follow. Sereth, she said, tapping her chest. Life, Varan, pointing to the horizon. Journey, Thalon, pressing her hand over his heart. Bond, Elias repeated them clumsily, earning soft laughter from the children who often gathered to watch. Your mouth is not shaped for our words, Liratha teased, but your heart learns quickly. It wasn't just language. She showed him how to greet an elder with a hand over the heart and a bow of the head. She taught him their customs of hospitality, how refusing shared food was a grave insult, and how touching another's forehead was a gesture reserved for those considered family. You must learn this, she told him one afternoon as they sat near the fire pit. Our people see you as one of us now. If you misunderstand their ways, you may wound them without meaning to. Elias frowned into the flames. What if I don't want to be one of you? Silence fell. Liratha's expression did not change, but her eyes softened. Then the bond remains, she said quietly. Not because we force it, because you gave life. That is not undone. To a ceremony of shadows in the 8th day since their arrival. Elias was awoken before dawn. Liratha stood at the entrance to his tent, robed in silver and white, a faint luminescence outlining her form against the rising light. It is time, she said simply. For what? Elias rubbed the sleep from his eyes. For the careth, for the ceremony of acknowledgement. The tribe wishes to honor you fully, and her gaze dipped briefly, a rare sign of nervousness. To witness the first step of our union. Elias sat up. Union as in marriage? Not marriage as you understand it, she replied. It is recognition, a promise of shared path, nothing binding beyond intent. Still, the weight of it pressed on him. He dressed quickly, donning a robe the tribe had woven for him, soft as silk, dyed in deep earth tones, and embroidered with flowing patterns that told the story of his rescue. The ceremony was held at dawn atop the highest dune. The entire tribe was there, arranged in concentric circles around a stone altar carved with glyphs that glowed faintly from within. As Elias approached, the crowd parted, and Liratha stepped beside him, taking his hand in hers. An elder with skin like polished steel and eyes clouded by age lifted a staff. Water-bearer, he intoned in galactic standard, his voice resonant and deep. You have shared Sereth. You have bridged Varan. Now, before the eyes of the ancestors, do you accept Thalon, the bond of life? Elias's mouth was dry. He glanced at Liratha. She watched him steadily, without pressure, without expectation. He exhaled slowly. I accept, but I also ask that we walk this path as equals. I don't want worship. I want understanding. The elder smiled, a thin crack across an ageless face. Spoken like one who knows the weight of choice, the crowd erupted in a melodic chant: his name, his title, words he didn't yet know but somehow understood. Liratha pressed her forehead lightly to his, a gesture of profound intimacy in their culture. "You honor me," she whispered. And for the first time, Elias felt the bond as something more than obligation. It was connection. It was possibility. Beneath the twin moons that night, as the twin moons climbed into the sky, Elias and Liratha walked together beyond the camp. The dunes were silver under the pale light, the air cool and still. "You are quieter tonight," Liratha observed. "Just thinking," Elias admitted, "about how strange this is. A few weeks ago, I was worried about dying out here alone. Now I'm part of something I don't even fully understand." "You understand more than you think," she said. "Our people believe that every soul has to journeys one outward, one inward. Outward, we seek new lands, new bonds, new futures. Inward, we seek to know ourselves. Sometimes the two paths meet. They stop at the crest of a dune. Below them stretched the endless desert." But now Elias could see patterns in the sand, ancient trails, half-buried structures, faint glimmers of light far beyond the horizon. "Your people have been here a long time," he murmured. "Longer than we remember," she said. "We came here after the fall. We hid from the galaxy's wars, from those who would use our gifts as weapons. We thought isolation would keep us safe, but it didn't." Elias guessed. "No." Her gaze hardened. "The wounds you saw on Keth, your friend you saved, were not from this world. They were from hunters, machines sent by those who once enslaved us. And now they have found us again." A chill swept over Elias. "Hunters. Here, are you saying someone else knows about this planet?" Liratha nodded. "And they will come, soon." The revelation struck him like a blow. His ship's crash, the silence in orbit, the faint electromagnetic noise he'd dismissed as background static, it all made sense now. He hadn't been alone here. He'd been caught in the middle of something far larger. Choosing sides back at the camp. The mood had shifted. Scouts returned with reports of metallic objects descending beyond the northern ridge's ships, or drones, or both. Warriors sharpened their blades and polished their armor. The great tiger beasts were restless, pacing the perimeter with low, rumbling growls. Elias stood at the edge of the camp, staring into the night. He was no soldier. His ship's distress beacon had long since failed. And yet, for the first time since he crashed, he knew that his choices mattered. "Water-bearer," said Keth, the alien he had saved, approaching with a solemn expression. "We prepare for battle, but our people have not fought in generations. They are strong, but not ready. You want my help," Elias said. "Yes," he laughed softly, shaking his head. "I'm a linguist and an explorer, not a warrior." Keth laid a hand on his shoulder. "You are more than that. You are bridge. Your people know war. They know how others think, how they fight. Teach us." Elias stared into the firelight, memories of Earth's long, brutal history flashing before his eyes. Perhaps this was why fate or chance had brought him here. Not just to save one life, but to help save an entire people. He turned back to Keth, resolve hardening in his chest. "All right, I'll teach you everything I know," VA promised in the starlight later that night. Elias stood alone beneath Astronine's vast sky. Liratha approached silently, her presence as calm and steady as the stars. "You have chosen," she said. "I don't think I had much of a choice," he admitted with a small smile. "But it feels like the right one." She stepped closer, so close he could feel the cool hum of her presence against his skin. "Then whatever comes, we will face it together. That is Thalon, the bond, the promise, the shared path." Elias reached out and took her hand, not as savior or water-bearer, not as a symbol or prophecy, but as a man choosing to stand with someone and with a people who had come to mean more to him than he had ever expected. Above them, the stars burned bright and cold, and somewhere beyond that glittering horizon, ships were coming. The peace of Astronine would soon shatter, but Elias was no longer a stranded explorer waiting to be rescued. He was part of something bigger. He was ready to fight for it. The night sky over Astronine was no longer empty. It began with faint streaks of silver cutting across the upper atmosphere, too linear to be meteors, too deliberate to be anything but ships. By dawn, they were no longer faint. They were countless, descending like spears from the heavens, their contrails searing the thin air with white fire. The hunters had arrived. The enemy among the Starcelias stood atop the ridge overlooking the encampment. the wind tearing at his borrowed cloak. Beside him, Lyratha stared skyward, her expression unreadable. "They come as they did before," she said quietly. "No warning, no mercy. What do they want?" Elias asked. "Us," she replied simply. "Our blood, our memory, our gift." He had heard fragments of the story before, how her people, the Jarai, had once been a proud civilization spread across dozens of worlds. How their biological technology, self-healing alloys, biometallic skin, neural resonance had made them the envy of empires. And how, centuries ago, a coalition of militarized species had enslaved them. Harvesting their gifts to fuel war machines and conquest, the Jarai had fled to Astra 9, hiding on a world believed barren and dead. But hiding had bought them only time. "They will land beyond the northern dunes," said Keth, approaching with a pair of scouts. "Drones first, then soldiers. They will sweep outward until they find us." Elias scanned the horizon. "How many?" "Hundreds," Keth said grimly. "Perhaps thousands." The Jarai warriors were brave, but Elias knew they were not ready for war. Their weapons were elegant, but archaic, their tactics ritualized and predictable. Against precision drones and orbital bombardment, they would be slaughtered. But he also knew this. The hunters did not expect resistance. Certainly not organized resistance. The water-bearers Planelius spent the next 2 days in a whirlwind of preparation. He called it a war council, though the Jarai had no word for such a thing. Warriors, scouts, elders, and even children gathered around crude maps drawn in the sand. "We can't meet them head-on," Elias explained, drawing lines with a metal rod. "They'll have orbital eyes watching for mass formations. But if we use the terrain, if we fight them on our terms, we can bleed them before they reach the camp." He pointed to the northern basin, where steep dunes and jagged ridges created a natural choke point. "Here, we turn this into a kill zone. Traps, ambushes, sabotage. Force them to spread out. Make them afraid of the sand." The warriors exchanged uncertain glances. This was not their way. The Jarai fought honorably, ritual duels, open battlefields. But Lyratha raised her hand, silencing their murmurs. "The water-bearer speaks truth," she said. "Honor means nothing if we are ash and dust." With her support, the tribe moved as one. Hunters carved trenches into the dunes, filling them with volatile resin that could be ignited from a distance. Engineers, more artisans than soldiers, repurposed their energy staffs into makeshift rail cannons and planted them beneath the sand. Scouts mapped the hunters' landing vectors, plotting routes for guerrilla strikes and ambushes, and Elias, who had once been nothing more than a stranded linguist, found himself at the center of it all, coordinating, planning, leading. 3. The first wave arrived at dawn on the 3rd day. Sleek, insect-like drones with wings that hummed like angry wasps. They swept low over the dunes, scanning for life. They found it. A single Jarai scout appeared on the ridge, waving a banner of woven fiber. The drones turned toward the signal, their weapons whirring to life just as the sand beneath them exploded. Resin ignited in brilliant blue fire, engulfing the first wave in a storm of plasma. The survivors scattered, and that was when the tiger beasts struck. Silent as shadows, the Theric leapt from hidden crevices, their riders slicing through the disoriented machines with energy lances. Within minutes, the first wave was gone. The camp erupted in cheers, but Elias did not join them. This had been the easy part. The second wave would be harder, and it came at sunset. This time, troop carriers fell from the sky, slamming into the dunes with bone-shaking impact. From their bellies poured soldiers, tall, armored in black, their faces hidden behind expressionless masks. They advanced in perfect formation, weapons spitting bolts of blue plasma. The Jarai met them with everything they had. Ambush teams detonated dune walls to bury squads in sand. Snipers picked off officers from the cliffs. Explosive charges turned the basin into a trap of fire and dust. The hunters were stronger, faster, more numerous, but they were not prepared for the fury of a people defending their home. 4. The heart of the storm. The second night. The basin was a graveyard of machines and bodies. The hunters had taken heavy losses, but they continued to push forward. And now their ships hovered low over the battlefield, preparing for a final assault. Elias stood beside Lyratha on the front lines, his pulse hammering in his chest. He wore Jarai battle armor, lightweight and seamless, woven with the same biometal as their skin. In his hands was an energy rifle built from scavenged parts and desperation. "They will breach our lines soon," Liratha said. "Then we make them pay for every step." A sudden explosion tore through the ridge, flinging sand and debris into the air. Through the smoke came a towering figure 3 meters tall, clad in black armor so dense it bent the light around it. Its weapon was a cannon the size of Elias's torso. "Karsoon," Liratha hissed. The enslaver. Elias recognized the name. The warlord who had led the campaigns against the Jarai centuries ago. He had been reported dead, or perhaps no one had ever truly defeated him. Karsoon raised his weapon, and a beam of white-hot plasma sliced through the ground, scattering Jarai warriors like leaves in a storm. Elias's instinct screamed to run, but Liratha stepped forward, raising her staff. "You will not take us again." The warlord's laughter boomed across the battlefield. "You will kneel, child, just as your ancestors did." "No," Elias said, stepping beside her. They kneeled to no one, together. They fired her staff and his rifle, unleashing twin lances of energy. Karsoon staggered but did not fall. He swung his cannon toward Elias, but a blur of striped fur slammed into him from the side. One of the great tiger beasts had leapt into the fray, claws rending metal, fangs tearing into armor. Seizing the moment, Liratha leapt forward, driving her staff into the warlord's chest. The energy flared white-hot and the great Karsoon fell. The hunters hesitated. Their leader was dead, and hesitation was all the Jarai needed. Now, Elias roared. From the ridges, the final trap was sprung. A wave of molten resin cascaded down the dunes, engulfing the enemy lines. The hunters broke, retreating toward their ships. Moments later, the sky itself split with thunder as the remaining drones detonated, self-destructing to deny the Jarai any spoils. It was Overv. The new dawn. The battle lasted 3 days and 3 nights. When the sun rose on the 4th morning, the hunters were gone, driven back into the void from which they had come. The basin was scorched and scarred, but the Jarai still stood. Elias stood on a dune overlooking the battlefield, exhaustion and relief washing over him in equal measure. Beside him, Liratha's silver skin shimmered in the new light. "They will come again," she said softly. "Not today, not tomorrow, but one day. Then we'll be ready," Elias replied. She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the twin suns. "You have given us more than water, water-bearer. You have given us hope, a future." He shook his head. "We did this together." She smiled, and for a long moment they simply stood there, watching the light spread across the desert. Then, without a word, she reached for his hand. "This is our home," she whispered. "And now, it is yours too." Elias squeezed her hand gently. "Then let's build something worth protecting." And as the sun climbed higher, casting long golden rays across the dunes, a new chapter began, not just for Elias Mercer, the stranded explorer who had given water to a dying stranger, but for the Jarai people and their unlikely future among the stars. The water-bearer was no longer an outsider. He was a bridge, a leader, a guardian of a bond that would shape to civilizations. And high above Astronine, where the hunters once lurked, the stars burned a little brighter, witness to a future forged not by conquest, but by compassion.